Good morning. Okay, a couple of things very quickly. I want to thank Charlie. Well, first of all, I want to thank the staff and everyone here for putting this together because frankly, these types of things don't happen as often as they should in the church. And so churches neglecting talking about prophecy just makes sure that the church will be in a constant state of just not understanding the world in which they live. And so this is such a wonderful opportunity to do what we're doing here. And I don't know if you've caught it, maybe you will after the two sessions that I have this morning, but as I'm listening to Tommy present what he's been presenting, he's going through the text as it has been understood or should have been understood since its writing. It hasn't changed. What Tommy's been sharing is timeless. And so what I'm doing is getting a chance to fill in the blanks of things that are happening currently to give us a kind of an understanding of where we are in time. The things that we know will be taking place, those are set in stone. God knows the timing of them, but it is for us to look at the world around us and say what fits, and does something fit? And don't make it fit, but if it fits, great, then go ahead and talk about those things. So my topic, my first of the two that I'll do this morning, deals with our movement towards what we would call globalism. And I'm going to focus on it pretty much starting at World War II, moving onward, though I will look a little bit at World War I and what we call the League of Nations. But the idea of people having a common goal of peace or whatever the case may be, it's nothing new. In fact, you can find kind of the blueprint for it at the founding of our country. Some of you may have known of a man named Immanuel Kant. And so you're thinking about the end of the 18th century, around the founding of our nation. But that idea that people should be able to gather together from wherever they are in the world and move towards some kind of a world peace type of a thing, we've been hearing about that as long as any of us have been around, because it's nothing that's new. It sounds great, it's idealistic, let's do that, peace, the idea that everybody should get on board with that. But the problem that you run into is once you get past the slogans and start to look into what they want to do to bring it about, you start to say, gosh, that sounds an awful lot like Revelation 13. Because we know that ultimately that there will be what we would call a global government. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. The only question is the timing of it. And so is the time in history ripe for something like that to be able to happen? And that's what I want to look at with you today. So before we get there, again, I want to thank Charlie for letting me be able to mention it to you, but my second of my sessions today is going to focus on Israel. And I happen to be a person who not only loves Israel as the covenant people that God has given not only a land, but also they are a heritage. And the church, as we have already seen, and we'll be talking more about it, the church is not Israel, and Israel is not the church. Israel is Israel. And what God said to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis still holds true today. And we'll get to that in the sessions that we still have ahead of us. But I'd love to get there as often as I can. Full disclosure, I hate being on planes. And not because I'm afraid that they'll fall out of the sky, because frankly, if my plane fell out of the sky and it's not my time to be with the Lord, I'll survive the crash. So I'm good with that. But I can't sleep on planes. So it's a miserable 13 hours or 14 or 15, depending on where I'm leaving from. And that's the only reason that I hate flying to Israel. But getting there and watching it change people's lives is why I love to go there. And I like to watch people's, you can see the little hamster on the wheel in their minds when they're looking at the places themselves and seeing them with their own eyes. It just changes you on the most basic of levels. So we have a trip going there next year. March the 15th through the 27th, and Charlie has said it's okay if I let you know, because you're welcome to join us, and we'd love to have you with us. So if you're interested in a trip to Israel and want to know what it's about, I have the brochures here, and I'll answer whatever questions that you may have. And I don't want to take up too much more of my time, but the first thing that usually gets asked of me is it's safe to go there. And now that I live in Weatherford, Texas, there's not a lot that I'm afraid of in Weatherford, but we used to live close to Los Angeles. I felt unsafe in Los Angeles. I do not feel unsafe in Israel. So if that answers the question, I'm going on this trip with you if you go, and I have every intention of coming back unless the Lord returns for us while we're there or for some other reason. So I don't have a death wish. So I intend to go there and see it with everybody that goes with me, and then come back here and get ready to do it again as soon as the Lord opens the door. So if you're interested, come on and talk to me, and I've got all the paperwork for you. So with that being said, this is the ministry that I have now in Texas, because I didn't go to start a church. I'm still considered a pastor on staff at Cypress, just not a salaried position. So I get to still be a part of Old Path Ministries that are there in California. That was the name of the church. We had been Calvary Chapel of Cypress, and then when some things started to change in the organization or in the association, we changed it to Old Path, Calvary Old Path, based upon Jeremiah 6:16, about the old paths and the good ways, and remembering where you've come from. That's the way when God lays down something, there's no reason to deviate from it. So stay on the path that God has put there before you. And that's the reason for the name of the ministry. And so if you see the web address there, I will have all of the PowerPoints that I'm doing here of my 4 sessions. I will have them available to you. If you're interested, you can just send me an email at that web address. When you pull it up, you'll see a place where you can send us an email or contact us and say, can I have the PowerPoints? And I'll already have your email, and I'll send them out to you. So I want to make those available to you. So what we're going to examine this morning is from a global order. It's a global order. Sometimes they call it the New World Order, but that's become so cliched, and oftentimes the people that are talking about the New World Order get into some really weird stuff. And this is like when people start to want to fit their tinfoil hat, and I don't want to do that. Because frankly, the things that I'll show you, I'm not as much interested in getting into the details of who they are and what they're doing currently. I'm more of a big picture. I want to look at it and say, they've been around for a very, very long time, these kind of people. But where are they in the agenda that they're putting forward? Because they all have kind of the same end goal. And they don't even realize it, oddly enough. And so let me just get this out of the way before we pray. When I look at groups like the World Economic Forum or the UN or any of the organizations that these people travel in, you get a lot of people who get very, very concerned about the conspiratorial side of it. And what are they doing and all the rest of it. And I find that the people who ask those questions the most are far too invested in this world than they should be. Because this is not my forever home. We okay with that? I mean, I'm not looking forward to spending my eternity in this existence. Mine is beyond this place. So let the world have their world. I don't care. What I do find is that the world's being set up for a group of people to take over, answering to one man in particular, which Tommy will be dealing with later today, the Antichrist. I see a world being set up for that man, and it'll be a smooth transition. Remember the tribulation, 7 years, and he's going to be introduced early on. That's a very short amount of time in world history, so everything needs to be in place for him to jump into it. He's got to hit the ground running. And I want to show you where I believe that that's exactly where we are in time. So with that being said, I'm not interested in looking into what they're all doing and getting into the deep dive. I just want to give you the big picture of what's happening, and it helps to put the world in context. So let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you as we come to you this day. We ask that you would help us in our understanding, not to get so stuck into the little details and the minutia of things, but help us to see the big picture. Your word gives us the big picture of things, and we want to be able to look at the times in which we live, recognizing that these things have been going on for a very long time. They're just becoming almost unavoidable in our hearts and minds to see what's taking place. God, help us to see that. Help us to have our eyes open, and help us to not be anxious about this world, because it is not our home. We give you thanks. We give to you all praise and honor in Jesus' name. Amen? So I want to let you know that you will be card-carrying members of Conspiracy if you listen to all of what I'm about to share with you, but I want you to be reminded of this. When you read that, little kids seem to know better than we do, because she says, I need new conspiracy theories because all my old ones have come true. So that's just funny. Do you guys find that funny? Most of you already, did you guys have breakfast and you're still sleepy from it? Because that should be making every one of you laugh. All right, Revelation 13. Here are some observations which I feel are important for us to consider. So what I'm going to share with you, here's some big picture things to just remember. When you read through Revelation 13, just remember that this is John recording what's being shown to him, and he shows to us what is going to be a world government. And I'm sure that Tommy will probably have some excerpts out of Revelation 13. I wouldn't be surprised. But what you're going to find is that there are some elements in chapter 13 that you might want to say, since we know that that is what's going to eventually take place, and this will be how the world is going to be governed, we want to look at it and say, here are some hallmarks of that chapter, because it helps you to look at the world around you and say, are those things in place? So here's just some observations. When you read Revelation 13, you have to say it requires governance and authority unlike the world has ever seen. So read through the chapter and say, when has there ever been a person and an inner core of people who have been able to, or would be able to, control the entirety of the world as we know it? It really hasn't ever existed that we can look at Revelation 13 and say, yeah, look at what that's going to be, but yet we see our world being set up for it, and I want to show you those things. Power will be consolidated in the hands of very few people under direction of one. And that would, of course, be the Antichrist. But when we start to examine the groups and the people who are making policy for the entire world, again, I pointed it out on Wednesday night, when you look at what happened starting in basically January to February of 2020, and then looking at where we are here and now, nobody could have imagined that the world could be brought to its knees from some event, what we now call COVID. We saw how they've actually changed the way that we live our lives. There are these little stickers on the elevators at the hotel that tells you that our world changed because of COVID, because it's telling you that you're supposed to sit or stand 6 feet apart, you're supposed to wash your hands, don't touch your face, use the stairs whenever possible. That's right on the elevator as I'm getting on to go down into the bottom floor. It tells me things have changed, and I think we all know that. But sometimes we can become almost immune to it because it's everywhere all day long. Now, technology would have to be able to govern every transaction that controls day-to-day life. Now, I'll ask you that question. I now have an ATM card that I no longer have to put in a PIN. I just have to put the little chip over it, and it automatically transfers everything. That means that everything that I do is known. So, people will say, well, then I'm going to just move to cash. Okay, great. I'm glad that you're going to move to cash. It doesn't change the fact that the world has changed right around you, and there's no getting away from it. We're not going back, by the way. We realize that, right? That kind of technology is in place, and it's there for a reason. It will be exploited at some future time, more so than it is now, and it will be done in order to control the entirety of the world's population. Now, is that conspiracy? No, it's Revelation 13. I just have to wait for it to take place. But in our lifetimes, we have seen the technology take shape where it is inevitable. And then the elements, if you'll notice in chapter 13, as you read through it, there are elements where it shows that the Antichrist will have this kind of control over military, the religious aspects, because it's forced worship. The society is basically controlled because they'll have to take a mark in order to just have day-to-day commerce. And then, of course, you're being able to just function as a society. So there are some of those people that say, well, if we have to go through the tribulation, we'll just hunker down in the mountains and, we'll be able to just barter and trade between us and all the rest of it. This is one of those things that gets thrown at people who hold a pre-tribulation view as we do. And it is, you people are not preparing your people for the world that is about to happen. And so these are usually from the people that we would call the pre-wrath or the mid-trib, those variations of that. And they say, if you guys are telling everybody that it's going to be a pre-tribulation rapture, you're not preparing your church and your congregation for what's going to happen when the tribulation begins. And as I read through it, there is not a thing that I could do to prepare anybody for what's about to happen because it has no precedent. So the idea that somehow I'm going to be able to prepare a church for that world that exists is just nonsense. So I love it when people tell me that because it's like, well, why don't you tell me how it is that I'm supposed to prepare anybody for something that the world has never seen? That's just nonsense. Once again, Tommy's already handled that the tribulation has to do with the unrepentant and it has to do with Israel. The church is not appointed to that, as we know from 1 Thessalonians 5:9. So, in the last 100 years, let's just look at that as a good indication of where we are. Here are groups of people that you can find that all have kind of the same objectives. And this is where people start to look at conspiracy. I'll tell you a little bit of background of who these people are, but I frankly don't care about the organizations and I don't care about the people who are part of it. What I care about is what they're actually beginning to implement and how it's affecting day-to-day lives and why that should matter to people who have a biblical worldview. Because it really is changing the world in preparation for something that is about to happen, and I believe in the very near future. So when you look at the League of Nations was the precursor to the United Nations. And what it was, pretty much like what we have in the UN now, coming out of World War I, it was the nations saying, we've had a First World War, we need to come together in a more global sense and pursue peace. And by doing so, we can marginalize the bad guys and not let them get another bite at the apple. That was the thought behind it. And that was all well and good, and it sounded great until World War II happened. And of course, that just turned everything on its ear. Of course, it was always bound to be defeated because, let's face it, man is always looking for his own power. And so the idea that people think that somehow we can all come together for the common cause of peace or whatever the topic may be, just remember that there are people who want nothing to do with that, whatever it is that you're agreeing to. So World War II happens, and then comes the United Nations. Now, most people don't know much about the League of Nations, but everybody knows about the UN because it's still there. So the UN is, again, it's a useful tool to make people think that we can get together and have common goals, but it is the biggest example I can think in modern history of what happens when inept people get together to do inept things. Okay? So the UN is as useless can possibly be, and so you know all the different kind of jokes you can make about it, like screen doors on a submarine. That's about as effective as the United Nations. So the UN is frankly a place where world dictators can get together and think that they have some measure of power. But they're irrelevant. They're kind of just silly, and I always love to mock them by saying it's a place where people who nobody knows get a chance to get parking tickets in New York and not pay for them. So that is the UN in total. It's hilarious to watch the people who are involved in it, and they have nothing in common whatsoever other than that they can have their governments pay them to just live lavish lifestyles and ignore the fact that their countries are a disaster. So there are also the think tanks and the groups. There is the Council on Foreign Relations. That's pretty much, very much like the UN. It's let's talk about all the world's problems, offer a whole bunch of solutions that have no chance of passing because nobody can agree upon them, but they get a chance to get together and act important. They're all kind of the same way. The Club of Rome, very much similar kind of thing. Smaller group, much more consolidated like the Bilderbergs, but just remember all of these people have one goal in mind, and that is how do we bring all the nations together with common cause to do whatever it is that's being put out there. All of these groups have been around for decades, and you basically want to say, in the worldly sense, you guys are always talking about the problems and how you want to fix them, but the problems get worse usually because you got involved. I kind of put them in the same category theologically as those who are among us that we would call the amillennialists, who believe that they're going to perfect the world to some extent so that Jesus can return, or worse, the dominionists, those people that say we're going to conquer the world for the sake of Jesus and we're going to subdue the powers of darkness and all the rest of that nonsense. I always have to ask them, and basically if I could, I'd like to turn around and say, let's look at the scoreboard and see how you guys are doing at your job. So, basically look around the world and everything that you've been promising to do, you're getting beat up in the process. You look really bad. You're not good at your jobs. It's kind of the same thing with these people. They're always identifying problems but can't come up with any solutions, let alone implement them. So that would be the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, a little bit different because that's Japan, that's Europe, and that's the United States. So they all have these different things. They start to examine world problems. They come up with solutions. And nobody wants to do them, and they will never be done because they're not in the best interest of all the parties involved. But what they're doing is setting the table, if you will, for a group who will finally come in, and they will seemingly in the world have all the answers led by one. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Now there's the World Economic Forum. So how many of you guys know what the World Economic Forum is? That is a scary group of people. So I will kind of jump into them a little bit. I want to make sure I don't run out of time. I already feel the pressure of it. So here's the process of the New World Order. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You find or you create the problem, okay? Think of the World Economic Forum. Think of what happened with COVID. Think about what's happening with the Green New Deal and the green energy and all the rest of that. You either find or you create the problem. You define the created problem. What is it and what then needs to be done by offering the solutions. So we're killing the planet with CO2. So the best way for us to fix the problem, here's the way that it goes. We're going to get away from the internal combustion engine and we're going to make cars that run on electricity, as though electricity comes from nowhere, right? Well, what do you have to do to create electricity? Burn fossil fuels. What do you do when you get in your car and you flip it on if you have an internal combustion engine? You burn fossil fuels. Okay, so why this is somehow lost on people, I'll never understand. You're just trading one for the other, and I mentioned it on Wednesday night. How many of you know what a carbon offset is? And I got pretty much the same response here on Wednesday night. Just a few of you. A carbon offset is the people that said if we're throwing up a bunch of CO2 into the atmosphere so that we can still go on private jets to here and there, we're going to go ahead and plant a bunch of trees to offset the carbon that we've emitted into the atmosphere. Which makes me say, okay, great, if trees fix the problem, just plant a bunch of trees and let me have my car. Dopes. I don't want to have your batteries. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to charge up my car that often. I'd rather just stop at a gas station and spend 5 minutes than an hour. I'm cynical, though. It's just kind of how I'm made. So they'll give the dire warnings if solutions are rejected. Remember AOC, we've only got 12 years. So just run up a bunch of debt then. So you want to marginalize or you want to silence the opposition. So if you say, well, wait a minute, things like I'm saying right here, this would get me canceled in most places. If I'm talking among this group here and I just go, excuse me, I have a question. If we can have carbon offsets, why don't we just plant a bunch of trees and keep burning fossil fuels? I'd get thrown out of the place because it's just too much common sense for them. They can't handle it. You want to gather people to your cause, which is again what they do, and the best way to do that is that you control the narrative. So anybody that is in opposition to the Green New Deal is just somebody who wants to kill the planet. That's usually the way it's framed. If you don't agree with us, then all that you want to do is violence to the atmosphere. And you want dirty water, and you want to kill people, and you want to do all the real, silly things that they say about you. So that's the process. Now here are the terms that are starting to be introduced into just the common everyday discussion. When foreign policy is discussed, this is how the discussion is usually framed. You are either a globalist, or you're a nationalist, or now there's a new term, Christian nationalism. So let me define what these terms are. When you look at the UN, when you look at the World Economic Forum, or all the other subgroups of people that get together, the trilateralists or the CFR or the rest of those people, again, remember, these are people with a real self-importance complex, but they're absolutely inept to do anything about anything that they propose. They will not be able to ever solve the world's problems, though they think that they do. They only contribute to it. But when you start to consider this foreign policy, you're going to have people that will be globalists, like we can't make every decision just for us. We have to consider what we're doing and how it affects the entire world. That's globalism. Nationalism would say, well, wait a minute, we want to be able to be good global citizens and all the rest of it, but I'm not going to get involved in something that's not in the best interest of our country. Our last president, President Trump, was that guy. And whether you liked him or not, doesn't matter. He was not a globalist. He'd hang out with the globalists, but we all saw what he did when it came to NATO, right? Remember that whole thing? How many of you remember what happened when he went to NATO? Okay, he basically said this, I'm a nationalist, and the rest of you people are just living off of us. So pay up, or else we're getting out. When he looked at the Iran deal, that's ridiculous. Why are we doing this? We shouldn't let those guys develop nukes. And you're thinking that somehow by having this in place, it's going to keep them from developing nukes. You're a bunch of crazy people. We're out of here. I appreciated him for that. But he was acting like a CEO and not a politician at the time. But that was why he needed to be gone. Because who on the world stage anymore is a nationalist that has any kind of power? Think about it. Who? As soon as the Biden administration came in, they began to undo everything that was more nationalist, and they became much more globalist in the things that they started to do, trying to get us back into the Iran deal. Anything that was as far as the environment was concerned, they wanted to get us back into those kinds of deals. What they started to do as far as the border is concerned went back to a much more globalist mindset than nationalist. So now you have this divided, again, however you feel about what happened in 2020, here's what I know. When you got President Trump around the globalists, you could see it in their faces. They hated this man. So he spoke at the World Economic Forum, and they were livid at some of the stuff that he said, which I didn't know what to expect when he was going to be the president, but the idea that he would put his thumb in the eye of all the globalists just made me love him when it came to that stuff. I just thought, great, good, do it. But anyway, with all of that being said, we are living in a world that is very much globalist. Now, what is this new category that we see, Christian nationalism? This is intended to put you in the crosshairs. Because there are those people, if you want to ask me what a Christian nationalist is, my definition would be different than most people's. Because if you want to look at me, I would consider myself to be a Christian nationalist in this. I'm a Christian, and I care about the things that benefit the United States more than I care about whether or not what we're doing benefits the world. Do I have any people that would kind of put themselves in that category? You and the whole audience participation thing just doesn't work, does it? So, I love the idea that what we do is beneficial to the people of this country. And I would love to see our view of the world reflected in the government. However, there are those people that think that we should not only involve ourselves in the political system, but we should take it over. That's a small group of people, mostly in the hyper-charismatic dominionist movement. I don't agree with them because my hope is not in this world. These are the kind of people that love to throw out 2 Chronicles 7:14 about if my people. Well, that doesn't fit. That has nothing to do with the United States. It certainly has nothing to do with the church, because the church shouldn't have to turn from its wickedness. That is dealing exactly with Israel, and it is theirs and theirs alone. That is the promise of 2 Chronicles 7:14, for the good and the bad. That is not a church passage, never should be. God did not tell us to set up a theocracy in the church, let alone one in this country. So when you hear that Christian nationalism, make sure again that you define the terms, as you should with all of these things. So going forward with that, most all world leaders are squarely in the globalist camp in these modern times. That is without exception. That is why the world leaders get together, whether it's the G7, the G20, the World Economic Forum, whatever they do at the UN. All of those world leaders are all on board to some extent or another. But let me say it again. I started to mention it, but I didn't finish the thought on it. When it comes to this topic, give me whoever they are at the top of the human food chain of the most powerful people on the earth, whether we know their names or not. I don't care how much money they have. I don't care how much power or influence they have. They are still ultimately just puppets on a string, and the devil's pulling those strings, and God's allowing it to take place. That is all that there is to it. So I am not impressed by who they are or what kind of power they wield. They would have none of it unless God allowed it. Keep that in mind, because it helps us to really understand the world in which we live. This is not our battle to somehow uproot and throw these people out. These people are put in place for this time because the world only is living on borrowed time. The Lord's coming soon. Real brief history. League of Nations, UN, numerous groups and associations, World Economic Forum, the ones that I have just mentioned, all these operate under the banner of security, of securing peace, equality, and equity for mankind. And the two things are different. Equality and equity are different things. Equality of people, equity that there shouldn't be rich, there shouldn't be poor, everybody should be on the same playing field. That is a major, major part of the World Economic Forum. Of course, the people who are putting in the policy are going to live lavishly. The rest of us are going to have shared misery. That is socialism at its core, right? Or like you hear sometimes, socialism for thee but not for me. That's the big wigs don't have to worry about these things. They're immune to it because they're the ones pulling the strings. They never deliver on the promise because the promise is based on a lie. You cannot force equity, equality, or peace. Man is far too self-absorbed and more concerned about their own well-being than to think about the well-being of others. Do you know the one place where that is different? The church. Because we are told to be concerned about the person next to us before we are to be concerned about ourselves. If we're operating biblically, that's the way that it's supposed to go. These guys can say that they want to do it, but they never will. That's why they all live so much better than the rest of us. They only serve to wield power under the guise of a stated mission. Again, we got to save the world, the environment, whatever the case may be, nuclear things, all the rest of it. Again, it helps to frame what we're watching take place between Ukraine and Russia right now. You guys know, obviously, we've been seeing that. We were told to pick sides. Have you noticed that as well? If you said that you didn't necessarily support everything going on in Ukraine, you were pro-Putin. Have you guys watched that, or have you guys all noticed it? I don't like either one of them. I don't want anything to do with supporting either. They're both corrupt. They're both horrible. Zelensky and Putin, bad guys. And they're sitting on corrupt countries, and they're becoming rich. So I used to be able to say, if you hate what I'm saying, I would give the email for my assistant pastor, but I'm not there anymore. So the League of Nations was the first worldwide intergovernmental organization whose principal mission was to maintain world peace. They all had this exact same thing. All of these groups want the same thing. It was founded on the 10th of January, 1920, and it was done so at the Paris Peace Conference that ended the First World War. And it stayed in place until World War II. And I'm going to go through these kind of quick because I'm starting to run out of time. If you want to look through them in detail, then again, contact me and I'll send you these slides for you. So the United Nations of World War II, the UN came out of World War II, and it was an intergovernmental organization. Stated purposes were to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, and achieve international cooperation, and to be a center for the harmonizing of actions of the nations. So that was the governing principle. It's never delivered on that. In fact, it's done much, much worse than anybody could have expected. Actually, coming out of World War II, all of its stated purposes, can anybody actually, if you pay attention to this, can you point out one thing that the UN has ever done well? Or efficiently? No, you can't. There are too many fingers in the what is that? How's that saying go? Fingers in the pie? How does that work? What? Okay. Too many chefs in the kitchen. Use whatever cliche you want to. There are just too many people who are involved in the whole process, and none of them have common interest. They do in what they say, but in the actual way that they function, no way. So they've always been just relegated to a bunch of people jumping up and down on desks saying this is what we're supposed to do, and they get together once a year to make a bunch of noise. That's pretty much what happens, okay? And they're very much ineffective. Currently, there are 193 member countries. That's why you can't get anything done. And only a few of them that have any kind of a GDP that really even registers in the world. That's why you have the World Economic Forum, and that's why you have those really elite groups, so they can say, let the hoi polloi of the world meet in New York, we'll meet in Davos. The power people meet in Davos. So the United States funds roughly 22% of the operating budget of the UN, last time we looked, which was 2019. How do you like that? Really? We pony up one out of every $5 to run that nonsense? That's prime location in New York. They ought to just sell it and put it back into our debt. Actually, you could sell all the property on the UN, it wouldn't even pay the interest on our debt. China is second on that list at 12%. That should be concerning, because that means that if China is going to pony up 12% of the operating budget of the UN, they're going to desire a seat at the table, much more so than we will. All other countries pay less than 10%. Not a single country other than the top two pay more than 10% of the operating budget of the UN. And I think it's by the time you get to the top 15, not a single one of those pays more than 1% of the operating cost. What a useless group. Here it is right here. Can you see it? Okay. So that'll tell you about the percentages if you're kind of interested in that thing. I don't know about you, that just makes me mad. A country that's $31 trillion in debt is ponying up a dime for this group of people. Silly. Here's the irony of ironies. I love this. If you've ever had a chance to look at it, the Human Rights Council, it's a rotating group of people. So they're going to look at the problem with human rights abuses throughout the world. Do you know who they cite more often than any other nation on the planet as far as the infringing of human rights? Who is that nation? Israel. The UN will accuse Israel of abusing human rights more so than any, I think actually all the other countries of the world combined in any given year. Last I checked. But look at who's on the Human Rights Council. I have them in yellow. China, Cuba, the Russian Federation, Somalia, Sudan, Ukraine, and Venezuela. They sit on the Council on Human Rights at the UN. If you want a case study in what a useless organization this is, there you have it in one slide. Those people are going to talk to us about human rights, considering the disaster that their countries are and the oppression that come through China and Venezuela and Cuba? Are you kidding me? And they're going to say anything about policy when it comes to human rights? Insanity. Again, a brief history, the World Economic Forum. Now, how many of you guys know could you pick Klaus Schwab out of a lineup? I didn't put a picture of him here. This guy looks like every villain from every Marvel movie that has ever been made. He just looks like that type. But if you find him, and there are a few other people that you'll see that speak for them, I got to be careful how I say this. These are among, whether they realize it or not, these are among some of the most evil people on the entire planet because of what they advocate and then the power that they have to implement those things. And I still have to be reminded, it is nothing compared to what's coming. But this is all done to prepare people for a world that is about to exist. Global government, that's the issue. Now, how many of you have heard of the Great Reset? Okay, good. Now I'm starting to see some hands. Now that means one of two things. You're either more familiar with the topic or now you're finally okay with raising your hand in here. And I'm not sure which one it is. But you're engaging. So thank you for that. I'm afraid I was putting you to sleep. Now this is the Great Reset. How many of you have been to the website for the World Economic Forum and got into this particular section? Seek help. You're weird. Why would you do that? It's important that we know these things. But when you read this is some of the most cynical stuff I've ever seen in my life when you read it. Because they are so blatant about what they're proposing to do, and they don't care that the little person is going to be run over by this. They do not care. And the callousness of this blows my mind. Let me read for you. Hopefully you can read the small print. But it says there is an urgent need. This is what started the Great Reset, COVID, right? So I'm not of the conspiracy group that says they put COVID into the world for the Great Reset. I think that it was the other way around. We can get into who engineered it, why did they let it go, all the rest of that stuff, what happened in Wuhan. By the way, I don't have time for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. In the 2020 election, I got a text that was asking if they could they expect my support for Joe Biden, that I would vote for him, and I said I'd rather go to Wuhan and lick doorknobs. I saw it somewhere else. I thought it was so funny I just repeated it. There's an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of COVID-19. Let me read that again. Managing the direct consequences of COVID-19. If we wonder why the public policy over COVID-19 was so insanely bad, it was for this reason, as you're going to see. To improve the state of the World Economic Forum is starting the Great Reset Initiative. Here's what I want you to know, and I hope that you already do. Anything that they would propose as a solution for anything, do the opposite. COVID-19, the COVID-19 crisis, and the political, economic, and social disruptions that it has caused is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision-making. That I agree with. It's when they start to get into what we should do about it. The inconsistencies, notice this. This is the resettling of the world order, is what they're talking about. is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision making. The inconsistencies, inadequacies, and contradictions of multiple systems from health and financial to energy and education are more exposed ever amidst a global context of concerns for lives, livelihoods, and the planet. Leaders find themselves at a historic crossroads, managing short-term pressures against medium and long-term uncertainties. That's the crisis. They have just identified it. Now, what's the solution? We enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery. When you start to look at COVID as an opportunity, you disgust me. But I don't matter. But here, look at how blatant they are about this. This initiative will offer insights to help inform those who are determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies. Listen to this. The direction of national economies. Direction of national economies. Isn't that supposed to be the sovereign purview of the country? What do you have to do with it, Klaus? Shouldn't have anything to do with it. Trust me when I say that from the moment that the Biden administration came in, they have been implementing World Economic Forum type things because they all share that common globalist worldview. So listen to how this is so callous. The direction of national economies, the priorities of societies. Where do you think all the LGBTQ stuff comes from? Okay? The nature of business models and the management of global commons. World government is what we're talking about here, and they're blatant about it. They have no problem saying this. So, drawing from the vision of vast expertise, the leaders engaged across the forum's communities, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of all human beings. Brothers and sisters, it is my contention that this is the same kind of platform upon which the Antichrist will come. Frankly, he could come directly out of this and he would fit seamlessly with their objectives. Prove me wrong. Who's involved? Take a look. Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, who is an agent for some of the worst evil on the planet. And I didn't bring it. I have this picture of him, and he's holding up a vaccine and a syringe. And the caption says, if his vaccine is as good as his operating system, it'll need a security patch before the first injection. But there's Tony Blair and Bono. Trump spoke at this. Every world leader of any kind of importance or any business leader of any kind of importance, any mover and shaker on the planet goes here, usually on a private jet, and some buy offsets and some don't. That's just me being cynical. Here is the last from 2010. These are their stated, this was their agenda. This was going to be the theme of their conference. Our conference here is the timeline as we approach the rapture. That's what we are talking about here in this conference. So their themes are things like this. Look all the way back in 2010. Improve the state of the world. Rethink, redesign, rebuild. That sounds like slogans in the church. We're always talking about reinventing and reimagining and all the rest of this stuff in the church. Don't do that. Go with what we know. The scripture is timeless. Why do we need to reinvent and rethink? Forget that. Garbage. We know what the first century church looked like. That's a great model. Go with that. But they're same thing. It's that same mentality. If we're always evolving and always changing, then it's always new and it's always fresh. That's the world looking at it like some of the church does as well. But this idea of rethinking and redesigning and rebuilding. Look at 2011. Shared norms for new reality. So when you hear these topics and then hear that, you can go onto the World Economic Forum and watch their videos. They have little video clips. It is insanity what they're talking about doing. The simplicity that we have of just our day-to-day lives here in America would come to a screeching halt in their perfect world. Because you wouldn't be able to have your own things. I mean, it's become a joke now that they're starting to talk about eating insects and all the rest of that stuff. Because it's easier to raise insects and eat them as a protein source because they don't emit any kind of greenhouse gases. This is bizarro world. So 2020, 2020, stakeholders for a cohesive and sustainable world. The UN loves that, sustainable. Until you find out what does that mean. That means if it's going to be sustainable, we've got to stop the way that we're living because we're consuming too much. That's what sustainable development means. So that means everybody needs to go more to a minimalist life. Don't have such a big house, don't use so much electricity, don't consume so much food and consumables of whatever kind. Live a more simplistic life. Basically, get a refrigerator box and waterproof it and live in that. 2022, history at a turning point, government policies and business strategies. In the Great Reset, you can go to these little wheels. So let me see if I can point this out. I think I have a couple of slides here, but this is one of probably dozens and dozens and dozens of different topics that they will show. And when you're looking at this one, this is just with vaccinations. So notice a couple of things here. Look up you see those little white dots around vaccinations? If you're to click on any one of those dots, it takes you out to the wheels of those little small print things. And they all have their own version of here's what we're planning to do about that. But look at how they're framing the debate on this. And again, remember, every major world power, nation-wise, is at this and they are implementing these policies in their countries. Ours is the best one for me to point to because we have to live with it every day. Look at the difference during the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, how we're dealing with energy, how we're dealing with Green New Deal stuff, how we're dealing with, you name it, supply chain, all that kind of stuff. It is such a night and day difference just in 2 years. But it is very much influenced by these kinds of people. But notice how they frame the debate. When it comes to vaccinations, look at the one that's up there at like 1 o'clock. Trust, misinformation, and health. So if you were to click on that, it would go to all these different fingers, and it's a way of saying, how do you make the people who don't agree with the vaccination protocols, how do you marginalize them? How do you identify who they are, and how do you change their minds or get them out of the way? Look at the next one that's at 3 o'clock, vaccine hesitancy. Now, I'm not here to talk about vaccines one way or the other. I have not taken one. I have no intention to. I know what I would do if I was to get COVID. I've already been through it. And so I know exactly what I do. I've got a phone call and a doctor, and they'll call my stuff into a pharmacy, and it's all the stuff you're not supposed to take, but it works great. So, vaccine. Look at when you really kind of lock in on this. So look at the different things. When you're looking at, again, 1 o'clock, trust, misinformation, and health. 3, vaccine hesitancy. Look down at 5 o'clock, economic business implications of vaccinations. How are they? This is them saying, here's what we need to do to implement worldwide vaccinations. Well, what if we don't want to? I don't want to comply. Who knows? What happens next? We do know what happened with people who didn't want to comply to some of the things over the last 2 years. We watched people be arrested. We saw what happened, shutting down all kinds of things, and if you didn't do what they were telling you to do, all of which we can look back at everything that we did. If there was ever another pandemic to break out, we should look at everything that we've done over the last 2 years and not do it again. Vaccine for security at 7 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, vaccinating against pandemics. Well, what if your vaccine doesn't work so well? We went from being a vaccine that would keep you from getting or passing the COVID-19 virus to it's now just a therapeutic. Well, I can take therapeutics that don't have side effects. Why don't I just do that? No, sit down, shut up, and do what you're told. That's what we are being led to do. But that just tells me that we're coming to a world that is able to be controlled, and the people that would stand in opposition are much more so in the minority than ever before, and they're going to be easy to control. Because they'll just be, well, look at what happened with January 6th. Put them in prison. So, once again, not to get into the political stuff, but if we don't notice that there are two different justice systems in our country for the ones that are agreeing versus the disagreeing, you're not paying attention. But again, do I get upset about that? No. I expect my country to be circling the drain like everybody else before the Lord returns. That's what I expect. Have I come off as cynical yet? So here's one of those examples, and I'm going to zero in on this a little bit. Now, this is global governance. This is a whole new platform that they have in there. So in their global governance, notice what I did by hitting anti-globalism, which is that blue dot. See all the fingers that went out there? Let me zero in on those fingers. Look at anti-globalism. Notice the first one that you have there that's about 11 o'clock, COVID-19. Then you have global health, geoeconomics. So under the globalism, how do you deal with world economics? That must mean that you have a plan that everybody has to comply. So then you look at development of finance, trade and investment, taxes. Global taxes is what they're proposing. It's been around for a very, very long time. So you have economic progress, workforce and employment, migration. That's a globalism issue. Values, geopolitics, and civic participation. But you have a whole bunch of other things there too, of those other little white dots. So if you were to start looking in there, again, if this was just a bunch of kooky people and pointy-headed intellectuals in Davos that had no real power other than just thought, I wouldn't mind. But these are people who gather together to get on the same page there and then start to implement it in their countries. Why do you think Europe is such a disaster? Why are we in the mess that we're in with the inflation that we have and the energy policy and all the other policies that we're starting to do, the LGBTQ and all those things that are making their way into society? That stuff begins in places like Davos and where these elites meet together. They all agree on these things. And here's the bottom line. The populations of the nations that they represent are suffering as a result of their insanity. But they don't see it. Or if they do, they don't care because it doesn't affect them. Look at what it says. If you were to go there on that globalization, where if you pulled that thing up, looking off to the right, here's what it says. Now notice how what they say puts you directly in the crosshairs. The widespread resurgence of nationalist and populist policies has raised serious questions about the future viability of global governance. This troubling trend is at least a part of a result of backlash against globalization. This was written during the height of COVID. You know who they're talking about here? Trump. This is who they're talking about because he was so anti-globalist. Look at how they decide. And here's the thing. If you agree with the idea that the United States should make every decision based on what's best for our people before everyone else, you're then at that point, you're a nationalist, not a globalist. But look at the contempt that they have for that idea. Against both the economic and social dislocations, it has movements that are generally expressing skepticism and perceived elites. That's everything that I'm saying right here is what they're saying that I'm the problem because I'm drawing into question the things that they're trying to sell you. So it goes on. Populist movements generally express skepticism of perceived elites, and they profess a faith in the wisdom of ordinary people, as though that's a bad thing, right? Yet they also tend to have an authoritarian bent and belief in a strong leader able to mobilize the masses. Again, remember when this was written, and who would they possibly be talking about in the entirety of the world at the time? So, examples of successful populist movements include former President Donald Trump in his 2016 election campaign, and then President Erdogan from Turkey. That's who they're referring to. The consolidation of political authority in Turkey. The only thing that they've done in updating this is saying former president. But notice they're going all the way back to 2016. They're saying his platform was populist, nationalist, read racist. Okay? Anytime that you hear these people talk about populists, they're going to say racists. Because if you haven't noticed, that has become such a cliched word now, it's sickening. Such movements typically appeal to those, you guys, particularly worried about threats to the social status due to their actual or feared loss of a job, immigration, or to those troubled by immigration and changing cultural mores, LGBTQ. In other words, people who feel especially vulnerable to exactly the kinds of changes unleashed by globalization. Here's what's funny. They're saying this as though it's a bad thing. I'm saying, you got it. You've just described me, and I have a problem with everything that you're doing for the exact same reasons that you say so. And I'll own that. I need to calm down. In a number of countries, governments have simply failed to understand or address the true impacts of globalization on their constituencies. Goes on to say this: even if countries have benefited from greater economic openness, a lack of sufficient attention paid to those left behind can weaken the political consensus supporting that openness. Basically, it's like, okay, you people in the United States, you're all for your nationalism because it's benefited you, but what is it doing for the people over there? All I have to say is, I can't help that they have bad leadership. What you want me to do is adopt the same kind of leadership here. No. Anti-globalization movements tend to oppose not only the aims of global governments, which they believe are rooted in fictitious cosmopolitan unity of human interest, but also institutions they believe are biased in favor of the other countries or rootless elites. Basically, that's just saying, they could put me in here and say, everything that Chris is saying is rooted in all kinds of a desire to try to marginalize us who are trying to fix things. That's what they've just said there, but they use all the flowery language. You have to kind of pull out a thesaurus to figure out what's being said here. But they love to talk in these kind of weird terms, cosmopolitan unity. So, these movements are at least partly a reaction to real failures to effectively function. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, some might even add the COVID-19 response. If people turn against global governance, however, it can exacerbate the very problems nationalist populist movements aim to solve, as nationalist politics generally push governments away from global cooperation and effective coordination. If you don't see between the lines here, they're saying the U.S., if it keeps doing that, is just going to become North Korea. Do you see it? Do you see how that works? So the very thing that you say that you want the most, the farther you go down that road, you're going to so isolate yourself that you're just going to be kind of a hermit kingdom and you're going to be run by Kim Jong-un. You've got to be able to read between the lines on this nonsense. So if you say to me, Chris, I think you're reading a little too much into it, fine. Okay. But show me the alternative to what they're exactly saying here, because then I'll point to the things that they're doing and how it's actually affecting the day-to-day lives of every person on the planet. So, Revelation 13 requires governance. This is a repeat of what I had because I want to make sure that we see this. Requires governance and authority unlike the world has ever seen. Power needs to be consolidated into the hands of very few. Technology needs to be able to govern every transaction of day-to-day life. Elements in Revelation 13, the man who will take this on, this is our 245 session that Tommy will be doing. He's going to be talking about the person who's going to slide right into this position. He will have this ability, unlike ever has been seen before, over the military things, the religious, the society, and commerce. Information control will be absolute. And again, you're seeing it right here. They are going to say, here's where we are. You can't do anything about it, and everybody who disagrees with us will be so marginalized or we'll just be getting rid of you. For the believer, last things. This information is intended, what I'm sharing with you is intended to demonstrate the lateness of the day. That is my only reason here. It is not a call to arms. I do not believe we are put on this earth to fight against the governments and somehow perfect the world for Jesus to return. I think that the church will be a small remnant when the Lord returns. I think I said this the other day when Sean and I were talking. I believe that if the rapture were to happen today, most churches will be open Sunday like nothing happened. I genuinely believe that. Does that make me cynical? Well, if I haven't already proven that, that would probably just solidify it for you. This information helps make sense of what's happening in geopolitics. I look at what I've just presented to you in light of Revelation 13 and said, we are right on schedule. That's why I do not lose my mind about this. I just look at my watch. If I had one, I'd say, we're right on time. This information assists us in witness and keeping a level head while watching world trends. Romans 13, starting at verse 11, do this, knowing the time. This is to us. This is our marching orders. It is high time that we awake from our sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand, therefore let us cast off the works of darkness. So if we really believe that we are in those days, and again, Paul wrote this 2,000 years ago, just shows that he believed in this imminent event, but it has not happened in his time frame. That's all that that means. But the lateness of the day is no different in our time than it was in his, because we don't know the timing of it. But what should we do? Let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry or drunkenness, not in lewdness or lust, not in strife or envy. Let the world have that. That's their thing. We are to be the counter to that. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. Be different, stand out. It gives you an opportunity to witness to a world that doesn't have the slightest clue what is about to happen to it. Doesn't even understand the things taking place around it and where it all leads. We are the one thing in this world that God is able to use to turn some, hopefully, to an understanding that they need Jesus. Father, we thank you so much for what we're looking at here, the excitement that it should present to each of us as we consider it. It's hard to watch something that we may love be so run down and removed from just what it's supposed to be, and at the same time reminding ourselves that we're not here forever. Our destiny, our eternity lies elsewhere. We thank you that you've secured that. God, we pray that you would motivate us as we look at not only what the Scripture has to say about our times, but then seeing the world around us fit your written word. May we be encouraged and emboldened in these days to be useful in your hands. And we give you all thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.